Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Richard Morchoe, and this is the Long Hill Report, and we are lucky to have with us this month, again, Gus Steeves.
Okay.
And a lot of things have happened since our last little tete-a-tete.
Not including the interviews that we did last week.
Well, not including that. We've had an election, and there's a lot of questions. I mean, I did expect a big red wave that didn't happen, not because the Republicans were saying anything intelligent, but because the big issue was inflation, and normally the party in power owns inflation, and the other group should be able to capitalize on that and scream and yell bloody murder about inflation.
Mm-hmm.
This has happened every time, and starting especially with, say, the Carter years.
Mm-hmm.
The cold wind of inflation has usually been a change agent in an election. So, you know, if somebody wants to scream and yell that something happened, I'll listen. Not that I believe that the Republicans were going to do anything really great in power to change the situation. Your thoughts on the election itself?
Actually, I'm not all that surprised because I think that by and large, the American populace is fairly conservative, especially when compared to like some of the European populations. And we have a tendency, even though you're right that the midterms have a tendency to flip-flop back and forth, it's really more just a cosmetic change in most cases because our general policies don't change that much. There's a little tweaking on one end or the other, but when it comes right down to it, American policy as a whole has been increasingly favoring corporate interests. It's been increasingly favoring international militarism. It's been increasingly slowly impoverishing the middle class for decades now. And really, the people that run both parties are pretty much in alignment with doing those things.
Well, the impoverishing of the middle class, we have our differences about inflation. And I would say inflation is the biggest aspect of that impoverishment.
Well, part of it is. But I think it's also a matter of, A, how you define where inflation is coming from, and whether it's how much of it's financial manipulation versus corporate profits, and how much. But I think a lot of the other issues are coming down to just the costs in general of things that have become in our society necessities, and in fact are, to some degree, in some senses, becoming more ecologically scarce, and that is starting to become a factor in the slow impoverishment of the middle classes.
Well, I'm going to let you get back to that, but I will say we basically have a disagreement about inflation. Absolutely, that inflation is purposely baked into the cake by the Federal Reserve.
Either them or the banksters.
Even when they don't screw up, and they've never not screwed up. The target is 2%, which is still confiscation.
Oh, it's essentially what's the other one? Exponential growth, which either way, no matter who's doing it, whether it's corporations or the Federal Reserve or banksters, whoever is doing it, when you have any set number that is not stable, what you're seeing is this.
The bank,
with the cost of everything slowly increasing, and that means the value of what you have has to constantly increase, or you fall farther behind.
when you say you had mentioned banksters, Federal Reserve, and corporations.
They're all basically the same.
No,
In many
a
respects.
sense. Well, in a sense, yes and no. The Federal Reserve is owned by the large banks.
Yeah.
It's actually
I agree.
owned by,
No, I know.
which
I agree.
is, which is, you know, this is why I don't feel about, I don't get too excited about this because, okay, we separate Federal Reserve and take it out of ownership of the banks. Ain't gonna make a difference because
No.
the Bank of England used to be a private corporation. It started out as a private corporation. The big guy in it, one of the big guys in it was Isaac Newton. And after World War II, it was nationalized.
Mm-hmm.
And it ain't doing great. It's a mess.
Well, the same thing could be said for the European Central Bank.
Certainly, which basically says something about central banking itself.
It probably does. I'm not going to deny that. Because it has a tendency to become captured by the people who have a vested interest in stealing a splint.
Well, I've talked to people about it and it says we got to separate it from ownership by the banks.
Yeah.
The banks do own it now.
Yeah, they do.
So if you separated ownership, I agree with you. Probably capture would happen.
Yeah. We see that with any regulatory agency.
Which we're not going to get into the discussion of the gold standard or anything like that. But basically, unless you can get government, banks, not to own the currency, you're going to have this always.
Yeah, probably.
So that aspect of it, we can discuss some other aspects of the election if you want.
Mm-hmm. Such as?
I'll let you. Well, I was going to put the ball in your court and punt, so you do the thinking and I could bat it back.
Okay, well, let's see here. I mean, I'm not at all really surprised about what the turnout was for Massachusetts.
Oh, no,
Because,
right.
I mean,
We knew that pretty.
Yeah, you pretty much knew that
Massachusetts
was going to
we
happen. I mean, when we were going into it, I was basically, when we were actually talking to Chris
Gloria?
Crawford,
Yeah. Oh,
and I
Chris.
commented on the fact that I suspected that she was going to get around 30%, and she did. And that's typical for the Republicans in Massachusetts, whether they be Republicans or somebody who, in her case, was a replacement for the Republicans, because they had no candidate.
Which was a good benchmark because it's basically saying, this is what you do, this is what we get. And now you had your chance with a libertarian and see what happened. And
Right.
that's what happens.
Yeah, and that's standard in Massachusetts between the Republicans or the Libertarians. If there's only one candidate running against the Democrats, they almost always get around 30%, unless they're a stellar candidate. Sometimes they do a little bit better than that. Frequently, though, I think we saw some of the other races, especially in Mass, where there were multiple candidates, and they basically all split around 25 or 30%.
Right.
You had 3%, 4%, 10%. That was about it. I mean, none of them really showed up that much. Unfortunately, I think, other than Crawford, I don't think any of the other Libertarians or the Greens or there was one, I forget what he called himself, the Workers' World Party or something, was running in office, and none of them got more than. I don't think any of the others got enough to actually make ballot status. I think it's still in limbo. But I remember last I checked, they were floating at like 2.9%, and ballot status is 3.
I like to think for Gloria and Chris, who we had on in the studio,
Right.
that we were a good deal of their vote. I won't hold any illusions.
No.
Until, you could say, and I will, kind of, in a way, there's a corruption here, in that everybody should be on the debate stage.
I totally agree.
And it should be in this plush but not overly ostentatious studio. But
We could do it if we wanted to, but
well,
it'd be a little crowded.
yeah. But I wrote a column. Feel free, I might call him, but I don't even remember the exact name. Feel free to exercise your right not to vote,
Yeah.
if that is what you want.
Right.
And in Massachusetts, there's no point in voting. Now you could say, well, what if everybody took that point of view. Well, in that case, I would see the point of voting if I were the only one.
Well, or a handful, yeah. That's true.
Well, yeah, a handful. But like I remember years and years ago, I don't know if you remember David Brudnoy.
Yeah. Yep.
He had I think the guy was battling Bill Barnstead, Republican minority leader, and he's going on about how, we're trying to save the state and everything, and how he could do this. And I called up and said, you don't have any influence. Nothing is going to change here ever. And he said to me, well, what would you do to reform the system? I said, I'm not interested in reforming the system. I want to close the state house down and make it a halfway house for megalomaniacs. Barnstead went off the rails, and Gardner says, I'm stealing that. That is the way we feel. I feel. I'm not, I'd like to believe there's a constitutional system that works, but I don't. And
unfortunately, it's increasingly broken. Yes,
and
I would agree.
Not voting is actually a vote, and if it's a huge thing, it says we ain't attracting people.
I think that's true. Unfortunately, the way the system is set up, it should be that way, but the way the system is set up, those people get ignored.
As it is now.
Yes,
it would
exactly.
have to be upwards of 75% saying, well, this is just.
Well, I think there's I keep thinking about, there was a quote from REM actually, and they said it, one of their songs from years and years ago, I can't remember what song it is, said something to the effect of, there's a difference between apathy and disgust. When some people will tune it out of apathy, and some tune it out of disgust. And I think what we really need to see is a fairly simple change on our ballots, which would allow every election to have none of the above or none of the others.
That is the one.
If we had none of the above and we decide we don't want any of these people, and and none of the above wins, neither of them can run again.
That is one of the few.
They're gone.
few reforms on the ballot I agree with. Absolutely.
That would make a huge difference. And that would actually draw a whole bunch of people who have become disgusted with the system back into voting, because they would actually have a say.
Well, here's what you and I have to do. We both have to change our names to none of the above. I will register in one of the parties, and you will register in the other. And that way they can't stop us. At that point, we've done it.
Actually, that probably has been done.
I'd love to see it.
There have been people that come out, change their names to all kinds of strange things.
I would say none of the above, as a human being, would be rubbed out pretty quickly. It would be, as they say, accident.
Maybe. Although, isn't that sort of the effective from the political sense of like anonymous? Is the none of the above vote?
Well,
almost.
I'm not understanding the metaphor.
Is that all of the people who don't participate and they protest and do the whole anonymous mask thing. And they do all of that stuff, and that's kind of a none of the above protest. We don't want any of these people.
Well, I think it's kind of a plaything now.
It
had
is.
its season.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's over now. The masks thing. Okay. I think the none of the above on the ballot would be great.
It would be.
It would tell them how much people running for office, how much the level of disbelief that they had, that the people had for them.
But of course, that's the last thing they'd want to do. Because they would rather be, as to use the cliche, a giant fish in a fishbowl, than realize that the rest of the public are sharks and want to eat them.
And it's worked so far.
Huh?
It's worked so far.
It has, yeah. As they gradually fritter away the ability of people to vote, and they do it in various ways. I mean, I think they mostly do it by neglect, for the most part. There are a few cases, not so much in this state, but in a few places where they will actively put laws in that will try to minimize the vote, or they will do other sleazy things to minimize the vote. But I think in general, they just don't care if we don't vote.
Well, see, this was an aspect of the column I wrote. You know, another part was, if you don't have no interest, if you don't care, please don't vote. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, they would like people to go to sleep.
I think they would. Yeah. You're right, they would, because then they could do whatever they want.
And they do.
And they do. You're right.
But there were no surprises in Massachusetts.
Not really. I mean, I think it's one of the things I thought was interesting is that not in Massachusetts so much as at the national level. It doesn't surprise me, but it should have been there should have been much more discussion in the political sphere of climate issues, of the war, of, you know, unfortunately they have a tendency to just grab onto the hot button issues of the day, whether it be inflation or it be abortion, for example, in the current election cycle, and to the exception and exclusion of the 14 other things that also matter.
Well,
some of them came up in surveys and stuff, but in many cases you had the surveys and the polls would neglect to ask people what they really thought were the priorities. They would give all these lists of things that the pollsters thought were the priorities.
That, yeah. I tend to be a closet apathist. But, all right, the Republicans. Look, I think Biden is A, a crook.
Yeah, I agree.
And B, senile.
Probably.
Okay,
Yeah,
once we've heard that, and you know, and I don't mind if you have, what do you call it, a investigation in Congress about him. Fine, that's part of your job.
Yeah.
But you know what? We all know he's a nut and a crook. And so what? You got other things. What are you going to do about inflation? What are you going to do to help us not have a nuclear? And that was not answered.
Of course it wasn't. They don't want to actually give any answers to real issues.
Yeah.
None of these people.
And so, though, I think their total should be higher because just they should have owned, I mean, the Democrats should have absolutely owned inflation. I can see why it didn't go as high as it could have gone. If they had said, yeah, this is our plan for inflation, it might not have been a good plan, but we have an inflation and we're going to fight to lower stupid spending like in a war. And we were against this war. Things that were intelligent to do and talk about, they were asleep. And they, you know,
both parties were. Because they will jump on
the Democrat Party is now the war party.
It very much is.
My Congressman Jim McGovern claims to be a peace guy.
I know.
He's a warmonger, and he's not alone.
Right. Well, did you happen to see? I don't remember if I sent it over to you. The situation where Warren and Ayanna Pressley were at some event in Boston.
Yeah, and somebody said, "You're going to get us killed."
And went off on them for that, and they basically just chanted him down and dragged him out of the building.
The chant was so inane.
Yeah.
Warren has had some respect for me for some things, like her stance on Glass-Steagall, and she lost it. She lost it. I have no respect for her after that.
I mean, it's kind of a problem is that we see some of the people, especially among the more quote-unquote progressives in the Democratic Party, and ironically, some of the more, I don't know what the term would be on the Republican Party side, where they're sometimes saying the right things when it comes to foreign policy and doing the sane things, whether regards to the war and sometimes regards to environmental issues and sometimes with regards to economic issues. But by and large, it tends to get drowned out in whatever their party is harping on at the moment.
Right.
At the moment, for like the Democrats, it's the January 6th hearings, which are going on forever and ever and ever, and will solve nothing.
Of course
Of
not.
course, they're not designed to. They're just designed to be a show.
Yeah, well,
and the same
it
thing will
was-
happen with the Republicans if they decide to do some sort of impeachment hearings for Biden. It will be a show that will solve nothing.
Right.
Because they know it's a game, both sides. It's intended to be a game.
Really.
Because they just want to show off that they can, like the old aristocrats from any previous era in history, it's an internal fight, and we're not part of it. And we don't really want to be part of it.
Right.
But the problem is that when those internal fights turn bloody, they often drag the civilians into the fight.
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully it doesn't become bloody, but
Well, there was
some of them tend to do.
what do you call it? I don't know if you ever read Shelby Foote's accounts of the Civil War.
No.
It's a very good thing. You might have seen, what's his name, Ken Burns. I'm no Ken Burns fan.
Okay. I've seen bits and pieces of his stuff. I've never really followed it that much. but
Shelby
I know who he
Foote
is.
talked about a Southerner, a soldier
Mm-hmm.
in the war, and the Union guys, the Union soldiers, surrounded him and said,
Mm-hmm.
"What are you fighting for?" And he said, "'Cause you're here." Now, that's the one thing I can understand in most fights, is that hearth and home
Right.
is the thing to be really fighting for.
That makes sense. Yes.
And but the hearth and homers get suckered into the war.
True. I agree.
Now,
Because as Smedley Butler pointed out, war is a racket. Many
oh.
years ago, it's always been a racket.
yeah,
Long before him, and it will be long after him.
Yep.
Long after us.
and
It's always driven by somebody who sees a profit in something that they can draw, or a power base that they can grab, and they can, as you pointed out, sucker the everyday person who just wants to be left alone and live their life into fighting
Speaking
for it.
of one of the few just wars that have ever been undertaken, I think it was Voltaire, might have been Voltaire, who said that, what's his name, Spartacus was a just war. Well, Spartacus would have had no problem being a slave or an aristocrat if he could get on top.
Yeah.
But the other one, there's one, and that was Haiti, the
What?
Haitian Revolution.
Oh, okay.
And that was just. But that revolution was over time suppressed, and it's going to be suppressed again.
Yeah.
Because we're going to help Haiti, which every time somebody, whether it's Bill Clinton or anybody, helps Haiti, things get worse.
True. That is definitely the
Let
old.
Haiti be Haiti.
That's one of the old. The government is here to help you. Kind
Yeah.
of thing. Yes, especially the U.S. Well, that's one of the things that we do way too often and way too. I'll put well in quotes.
There
is
is.
that we seem to get ourselves involved in little brush fire wars all over the world,
There's got to be something there.
and we
though.
never get out of them.
There's got to be a hydrocarbon there. There's usually something there.
Usually,
A rare earth or something now.
or diamonds.
Oh, look at what
or
we did.
something.
We didn't go into war in Bolivia, but we overthrew that government. It's now they have an elected government.
Right.
Why did we overthrow them?
Lithium.
Lithium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the
and
same
I-
reason we keep playing games with Venezuela and that idiot Juan Guaido, who has never. I mean, he was elected to his seat in the parliament in Venezuela, and that's it. He's never been
Yeah.
president. He's never
Well,
run for
we
president.
decided
he's
he-
never wanted to be president until we decided to put him up there.
Yeah. But this is now, again, the problem of democracy. That how many people, if you go down, let's go out and, before the sun completely goes down, do a man on the street thing. Do you know who Juan Guaido is?
On average, probably not. Most people don't.
1 out of a billion. A
Maybe.
million. 1 out of 100 million, I
Yeah,
would guess.
maybe something like that. And we do, but we could. And I think that's the point. Actually, people like that are totally interchangeable.
Oh, yeah.
They're designed to be.
Yeah.
It doesn't, because we can pop up a Juan Guaido in many countries to do exactly the same thing, which is to be the front man for some some American aristocratic takeover of the country to do what they want it to do, so they can loot it.
We propped up a whole movement of people who flew planes into the Twin Towers. And who did we prop up after they did that? In Syria, allies of Al-Qaeda became our allies to overthrow the Syrian government. Why? They had something, like oil, which we've stolen.
And we've stolen their oil, we've stolen their food.
Food, yeah.
Yeah, we keep sitting on like a third of their country.
Yeah. Yep.
We keep allowing the Israelis to attack them. We keep allowing the Turks to attack them.
Yep.
And the Russians, one of these days, the Russians are going to say, well, they're just going to let the Syrians go and let the Syrians start opening fire. Because I think that's the only reason the Syrians haven't done it yet, is the Russians are saying, you do not want to get into a fight with these people. A, they will clean your clock, and then B, we will end up having World War III. Because we will have to come in to save your ass.
Well, you would think somebody at the State Department would get that. But then again...
I think maybe they do, and that's why they keep playing the game, because they know the Russians are sane, despite the fact that they constantly say that they're not.
Well, yeah, it's all...
The problem is they're not.
It's a lie. That, everything about the State Department in this war, the proxy war, is not true. And, Biden said he would wreck Nord Stream. And then it was done. How can that not be an act of piracy?
Act of war.
Well, piracy is an act of war when a state actor...
Well, I guess that's true. That's true.
But
the question is, who's an act of war against? Both
it
Russia and Germany.
It's actually a war, funny enough, against the northeast of New England. Because
ironically, that's true.
Blinken said after the bombing, this is our opportunity to sell oil to Europe, gas or hydrocarbons to Europe, and cut the Russians out.
Yep.
Well, where are the hydrocarbons coming from? We have to pay more in New England because Blinken wants to sell them to Europe.
And they don't even have the processing capacity in Europe to take them, so they got a bunch of liquid natural gas ships floating out to sea at the moment because they can't do anything with them right now. Which, of course, is benefit to them, to the people who are making money off of it, but it certainly does benefit us or the Europeans.
Yep. Interesting, fun fact, not really.
Funny in the sense of crazy fact.
Well, we are buying Russian oil.
I know.
And we're buying how it's getting out? It's going to Italy, being refined, because if it's not refined in Russia, we're not importing it. We're importing it from Italy.
Or India or some other country. Yeah.
And we are buying Russian oil from what Biden will tell you are the world's worst people, the most disgusting people. But please sell us oil.
Yeah. It's a matter of going to the sleaziest drug dealer in a basement, holding out your arm and saying, inject me. Because we are so totally addicted to oil in this country.
But
Western civilization in general is, but our country is especially bad.
I'm not giving up my car, I will admit. And I'm not turning off the gas in winter. So if you want to call me an addict, you can.
Well, I think there's obviously, we're in a situation where, at least in this part of the country, we're totally reliant on it. Our entire civilization has gotten to the point where it's totally reliant on oil. And I don't know how we're going to get out of it, for the very reason you just stated.
Well,
because we need it to stay warm. We need it to get to our jobs. We need it to grow the food that we eat. We need to do virtually everything.
Well, as I said, because we're at the end, as I couldn't remember the quote. I think I remember it now. The novelist Philip K. Dick, reality is that which does not go away once you stop believing in it.
Absolutely.
And we need it now. It is a wasting asset, and there's no easy answer.
No, there isn't.
And ladies and gentlemen,
it's a It's a predicament that we have to find a way out of, and I don't know if we will.
Well, we're going to have to discuss that next month. And in there you used my most unfavorite word, we. Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't been enlightened, it's not our fault. Well, maybe it is our fault. Thank you very much for coming by. And especially thank you to Drew Anderson,
Yep.
our engineer, Major Domo, and King of the Hill. Thank you.
Thank you all.